Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons specifically, and Netflix's Black Mirror Bandersnatch, which was a brand new Black Mirror episode that came out in 2018, which was very interesting and has caught a lot of people's attention, and a lot of people are talking about because it uses technology in new ways to tell stories in a new way or in a more elegant way. So let's talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about Black Mirror. Then I'll talk about Netflix. I'm going to talk about Black Mirror, and then I'm going to talk about Bandersnatch. And I'm going to talk about specifically how this all links directly to dungeon mastering and Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. So one, just to be clear, I'll go through all three. Netflix. I'm a huge fan of Netflix. Netflix is just huge. It's hard to even say how much of a fan of Netflix I am. So I think we pay like $18 a month for Netflix. I'm pretty sure that's the case. I think we still get the discs, but we don't actually use it. And I consider Netflix free. Like, we pay for it every month, but I never even see, like, it's such a small amount of money that it never hurts us. And the value we get for Netflix is so much higher than the value we pay. I feel like, Netflix is one of the companies that has the most goodwill for me. I absolutely love Netflix. I feel like, I would pay the money I'm paying for Netflix just for Voltron and Lost in Space. So, like, everything else is gravy, and I'm just so happy with Netflix. And I really I think they have the best business model in the world right now, one of the best business models in the world right now, and their value to the value I receive to the amount I pay, I wish so many other companies were like this. There's a few that are like it. Another one that is like that is Google. I'm a huge Google fanboy. I absolutely love Google and their products. But I'm a massive, massive fan of, specifically of Netflix. All right, so Black Mirror. Let's talk about Black Mirror. Black Mirror is a really weird show. I've only ever seen 3 episodes of Black Mirror. So everybody raved about Black Mirror, so I turned it on, started with episode 1. Halfway through episode 1, they said, this show is going to be about the Prime Minister of England knowing a pig in a biblical way. So I'm like, you know what? I don't really want to see that, right? And I was like, click off. And now, so I saw half an episode of Black Mirror, and I forgot that show exists for about 3 years, right? Because I was like, I don't want to see any of that. Definitely not for me. So, but the show's its critical mass really built up, and people were like, Black Mirror's amazing. So I kept hearing this, and I'm like, well, that content's not for me. I'm not really going to go down that road. But then everybody raved about the Black Mirror Star Trek episode, so I watched it, and it was not, it didn't have the England Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of England knowing a pig in a biblical way. I'm like, okay, this is a little more, at least this is viewable, right? So I watched it, and it was brilliant. It was a brilliant piece of art. It was a really good show. It was a good episode, right? So, and then Black Mirror Bandersnatch came out, and I felt I had to watch Black Mirror Bandersnatch because I'm a technologist. I actually I make my living doing technology. I pay attention to technology. Technology is a huge part of my life. I love technology, and I make my living on it. And if somebody is doing something really innovative in the technological space, and I also love when technology bumps up against art. I'm an artist. I like to tell stories. And so I was like, this is checking a lot of boxes. I want to see this. And I felt it was safe to go forward with Black Mirror to watch another episode, because I didn't feel like I had been completely robbed of my dignity by watching the Star Trek episode. So I'm like, okay, so I watched my 3rd episode of Black Mirror, which is Bandersnatch, right? So I'm like, okay, let's do it. So I watch it, right? And Bandersnatch is brilliant. And so let's get into the Dungeons & Dragons part, all right? So Black Mirror Bandersnatch is a story about game development, video game development, and specifically the story of Stefan and Colin, these two, and Mohan, right? Stefan, Colin, and Mohan. And Mohan is the video game producer. Colin is a video game is a veteran video game creator, and Stefan is a brand new nascent video game developer. Okay, it's the story of these three men. There's also a few women in the story, but they're not the catalyst. They're not where the energy of the show is coming from in this particular episode. So basically, oh, by the way, there is spoilers for Bandersnatch in this content. Just put that out right now. All right. So what happens going forward is the whole show then goes into the question, and so basically the game that is being built in the episode Black Mirror Bandersnatch is a game called Bandersnatch, which is a video game based off of a book of a guy who was brilliant and wrote this beautiful piece of art, which was a choose your own adventure book, right? But literary and adult, right? But he also, the real author of the Bandersnatch book in the story, cut off his wife's head and killed her. Became a became a murderer, right? So most people were like, it invalidated his work, right? Which there's absolutely an argument that some of your actions can invalidate your art, right? That's absolutely a discussion that a lot of people are having today. Does your behavior invalidate your art? It's a really interesting question. It's bigger than the scope of this video. I'm going to keep moving. All right. So basically, Black Mirror Bandersnatch is every Dungeon Master content. Every Dungeon Master should watch, if 18 and above, should watch Black Mirror Bandersnatch. And the reason why is the movie is talking about the things we deal with at every level of our game, which is free will. Is there free will? And so so basically, the structure of the Black Mirror Bandersnatch story is that the video game branches. It's you come to a decision point and you have to choose yes or no, or you have to choose between these two different decision points, like apple or orange, or kill and eat the sheep, or pet the sheep and let it go, right? There's these decision points, right? So you have these decision points within the story. Also, Black Mirror Bandersnatch did something that has not been done before, to my knowledge, at this level of expertise within Netflix. Excuse me. And that is specifically allowing choose your own adventure, allowing the viewer of the Black Mirror Bandersnatch content on Netflix to literally choose the path of the story. Okay, now choose your own adventure content is very old. What's new here is the smoothness, right? So this is done incredibly smoothly. You can use your controller, you can watch it on a laptop, and one of the things that was beautiful is you could turn on Black Mirror, and if somebody doesn't understand what's happening and doesn't understand that it is a choose your own adventure interactive story, they can just watch it, right? So a muggle, a normal human being, can turn this thing on and it will auto choose a path through the story, and they can watch the story the way they would watch any other television show. But it also allows you to do the path choosing yourself, okay? And so there's so many things that are incredibly specific to Dungeons and Dragons within this, and that really have to be witnessed as Dungeons and Dragons, right? That have to be witnessed from a storytelling perspective, to be thought of from the perspective for telling stories within Dungeons and Dragons. It really is fascinating. So before I even go any further, one of the things I was thinking about is, what about this within a Dungeons and Dragons game? Is there a through path where the players don't say anything and allow the Dungeon Master to just tell the story, and the story goes through using the characters that have been created, right? I'm just putting this forward because I think it's an innovation opportunity that becomes evident once you watch Bandersnatch. We as Dungeon Masters are already doing all the time what it talks about in Bandersnatch, creating these choice action worlds where our players get to choose yes or no, eat the sheep, pet the sheep, all these different choices, right? And we're already creating this, but one thing we don't have is the dungeon master starts the game telling the story, and he never stops. He's never interrupted by the player characters. And the player characters have created their characters. The character sheets are there at the table, and the players are just jumping in and changing the path of the story when they want to, rather than them having to change the path of the story at every single opportunity. Is there a world where you get together for a 2-hour Dungeons & Dragons session and not a single player makes a single decision, and you just shut your mouth for 2 minutes, for 2 hours, shut your mouth for 2 hours, every single player, and listen to the story that the Dungeon Master is telling? Now, I'll tell you right now, I don't want to see a world where every game of Dungeons & Dragons is like that. That would not be a good thing. But I definitely think there are some Dungeon Masters on some nights where that might be exactly the best way for the game to go, right? And the idea that your Dungeon Master has a story that can be told with your character without you making any decisions that might be better than the story you were going to tell with your own decisions, right? So it's just something that Bandersnatch has that Dungeons & Dragons doesn't, that is an innovation opportunity for 2019, for somebody to build or to put that into their game, right? And again, this would not be high demand. This would be only for a very few groups with incredibly skilled game masters. Now, the reason why I'm talking about on my channel, right, is I do not make content for new dungeon masters. In fact, if you're a new dungeon master and you're listening to my content, be very wary about applying any of the advice you get here. Only advice that would be helpful to newbies on this channel would be incidental, because I don't make content for new dungeon masters, and the reason why is that is an absolutely saturated market where you can get tons and tons of advice for new dungeon masters. There are tons of people making great content for new dungeon masters. I don't touch that. All my advice is for skilled veteran game masters. And for skilled veteran dungeon masters, I really think this is something that we should really think about trying in 2019. And I may do some additional content on how that would actually be done. All right, what else is in Bandersnatch that we really need to look at carefully, right? Well, the real question of Bandersnatch, the entire point of the show, is what is the actual true nature of free will? Do we have no free will? Do we have the perception of free will, but actually no free will, but we believe we have free will? Or do we have free will? Can we actually choose? And this was really important, and the reason why every dungeon master has to see Bandersnatch is this idea that something really unique and special is happening here, right? We have to pay very, very, very close attention to what's going on in Bandersnatch. And the reason why is, all right, right now, in 2018, there are Dungeons & Dragons games going on, and they are fitting into these three groupings. And so let's talk about it. No free will. How do you know you're in a no free will game, right? Well, the first clue that you are in a no free will game, Dungeons & Dragons game, as a player, okay, is the dungeon master or other players will say to you, oh, hey, well, we've reached the dungeon, we have to go into the dungeon now. And then somebody else at the table, one of the other players goes, you know what, we just had two skirmishes, let's go back to the inn, right? And if the dungeon master or the players go, well, listen, we're here to play Dungeons & Dragons, here's the dungeon, we don't really get to choose to just go all the way back, go through two more random encounters, and go back to an inn and deal with people that the dungeon master really hasn't built a story there. There's not going to be anything for us to do there, right? We have to keep going because this is the game. Thinking that Dungeons & Dragons needs the dungeon. Dungeons & Dragons does not need the dungeon, right? But I have been here. I have 100% been here. I've sat at tables where other players will go, well, we can't do what you're saying because the dungeon master hasn't prepared a story for what you're saying, and there's a dungeon right here that you can see the 5 pages of loose leaf that he wrote last week for this, right? And I'm like, okay, let's go into the dungeon, right? That is a no free will game, right? They're not even pretending that there's free will, right? That's a no free will game. They absolutely exist. You should run for the hills when you see them, okay? Now, I also want to be clear, and I want to talk a little bit about history, right? So, just to be clear, no free will and perception of free will is how the game Dungeons & Dragons was written in 1974, okay? It is absolutely not the best form of the game, and we're going to talk about the free will aspect in a minute, but we just got to recognize Gary Gygax built the game as a no free will game or a perception of free will game. The idea was that you create a story and then your characters make some choices, but at best it's a perception of free will encounter, right? And I don't think at the beginning of the game, Gary Gygax really ever really saw it at the very beginning, at 1974, 1975, 1976. There really wasn't an idea that the story could go anywhere, right? It was like, we're going, your dungeon master is going to write 20 pages, a 20-page story outline, and then you're gonna play to fulfill that outline. And the question will be, do you die and then you make a new character and you go through the same path? A new character goes through the same path your other character goes down. That would have been the change. Also, there was some branches that all would then shunt back to the original branch, right? Now, no one should take any points away from Gary Gygax for building a no free will, perception of free will game in the beginning. And the reason why was he was establishing an entirely new genre of art, a new genre of storytelling, a new genre of gaming, right? He was creating a pure innovation. He was creating an element of Americana, and that was enough. You can't innovate before you've innovated, right? You can't innovate your innovation as you're innovating it, right? He wasn't a time traveler. He had to do the first thing first, and then that could be improved. It could be transformed, right? The games we're playing today, and the game that I'm going to talk about in a minute, a free will game, is a transformation of original Dungeons & Dragons. I don't think it was the original intent, because the original intent couldn't even see where you could only see a free will game from the shoulders of a perception of free will game. That's my take on that, okay? All right, let's keep rolling. All right, perception of free will games. These are very, very common. By the way, the first game, right? Those Dungeon Master games, those are run by people who are ignorant and think that that's the way Dungeons & Dragons is run, because they really haven't changed their perception since 1974, or they were taught by somebody who learned the game in 1974 or close to that and never evolved as a Dungeon Master. So it's being done out of ignorance. Sometimes it's done out of selfishness. There are a lot of very, very dedicated control freaks that become Dungeon Masters because it absolutely attracts control freaks, right? Because you're literally controlling an entire world of people and weather and politics and objects, right? It naturally attracts control freaks. So you might really have a selfish control freak who's like, I'm perfectly happy giving no one at this table free will, and I'm going to tell the story I want to tell regardless of what anybody here says, right? Which I also get the irony of me saying, hey, would it be cool if the Dungeon Master just told their own story all the way through? That should be an exception, not the rule. And that, again, that's only done at the highest levels of the game when there's a powerful trust that's been built between players and Dungeon Masters, not a Dungeon Master essentially trapping with their charisma and their intelligence and even their artistry people to hear their story, their unwritten novel. That's a bad situation, right? And there's a difference between the two, between what I just said. It's a very subtle and nuanced difference, and that's why I keep saying everything I'm talking about is for skilled veteran Dungeon Masters. This is not the shallow end of the pool. This is the deep end of the pool. All right, okay. All right, so perception. Perception is a really common type of game where the Dungeon Master is going to let every player at the table think that they have free will. They're like, are you going to eat the sheep or are you going to pet the sheep? You eat the sheep and you pet the sheep, but the reality is what's coming is you are going from Silverhorn Village to Redleaf Village, right? And nothing you do is going to change that direction. The Game Master the Dungeon Master has written a story, and you're going to go through that story, and there are going to be choices that are put in front of you that look like a choice, but aren't real choices, okay? This is incredibly common today. Many Dungeon Masters think that this is okay to do. It's not. You really, and we're going to get to free will in a minute, but again, this is coming from ignorance, or this is coming from selfishness, right? These type of games. And the reason why is this actually was okay. Perception of free will was okay in the 80s, right? And the reason why was people didn't know that that's what the Dungeon Masters were doing, right? Or they didn't have, or it wasn't talked about constantly on Twitter and on YouTube the way it is today. But now people know that this is a tactic of Dungeon Masters, so it has to be left behind, okay? So the last type of game is a free will game, right? An actual free will game. This is what I run. This is play to find out, not play to fulfill, okay? Now, Dungeons and Dragons can absolutely be a free will game, but it was never built to be a free will game, okay? I love Dungeons and Dragons. I think every single player in Dungeon Master should play Dungeons and Dragons for at least a year to 2 years before they touch any other tabletop role-playing game, purely out of respect and necessity. Dungeons and Dragons is the absolute best gate to walk through to enter the world of role-playing, bar none, okay? But once you've played Dungeons & Dragons for a year, 2 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years, you should be graduating to games that are built for free will. Games that are built on the shoulders of Dungeons & Dragons, right? And are doing things that can only be seen once you're standing on the shoulders of Dungeons & Dragons. All right, what are these games? Fate, Index Card RPG, Powered by the Apocalypse, including Dungeon World, which is the best of them. The best of all the PBTAs, and Blades in the Dark, right? And Forged in the Dark games. These are all play to find out, not play to fulfill. And they are, and also Sly Flourishes. By the way, if you want to do this with Dungeons and Dragons, the best path is Sly Flourishes material. Lazy Dungeon Master material talks about this. It's the Dungeon Master literally writing down 3 or 4 index cards worth of concepts and ideas at the beginning of the week, and the story is being told collaboratively, step by step, between the Dungeon Master and the players, and nothing is ever written out more than a week in advance. And that way, when you come to the table, you are playing to find out, not playing to fulfill, okay? And this is true free will games where player choices matter at every single turn. They actually change the direction of the game, and they can change the direction of the game because the Dungeon Master hasn't written a 20-page story that they refuse to let go of. They've written 3 or 4 index cards worth of material. They have concepts. They have no story path, and that story path is built literally at the table with the consensus and the imagination of the players and the Dungeon Masters, right? Now, the top of it is when you're playing a free will game, which is incredibly hard to get into, actually, and it's difficult to get there because you need experienced, skilled, veteran players and Dungeon Masters and Game Masters, right? All of that has to be in place, right? And it's hard to get there. It is hard to get there, but it is the utopia. You should be striving to get there, right? And I'm so glad that we have Dungeons & Dragons that allowed all these other games to exist. And I'm also really hoping that Dungeons & Dragons 6th edition can truly be built from the ground up, a free will game, all right, a full free will game. And Bandersnatch really, made me recurse and really think about my dungeon mastering and the type of stories I'm telling. I'm blessed to be telling these type of stories. I actually play in some games that are non-free will or in perception of free will at times, not all games, but some of them I play in. And the reason for that is I'm trying to help build the next set of Dungeon Masters and of Dungeon Masters. And frankly, I think you have to go through DMing some of those games of no free will and perception of free will to get to the free will games. And you do this by investing time. You have to invest time. Sometimes poor games are the gate you walk through to get through to great games. So this is my thought. And actually, Bandersnatch is incredible. It is really an incredible piece of art. It's an incredible episode. It is every Dungeon Master content, 18 and up, and it will really make you think about your games and where you are giving no free will, where are you giving the perception of free will, and where you're actually giving free will. And that's a deep, heavy question, and I think it's awesome. And to see it so well portrayed within Bandersnatch was amazing. Ironically, it looks like I gave 0 spoilers for Bandersnatch. That's okay. Thank you guys very much for listening to my thoughts on Bandersnatch and Dungeons & Dragons. Get to those free will games, and if you're in them, See what you can do to pull somebody else up from the perception of free will games into the free will game space. Thank you. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful day. And I also would love to hear your comments down below on what you think on this topic. Take care.